Hello there. You're watching the English news with me, Karim Fazakri, coming to you live from Algiers and All24 News. These are your headlines. Work to clear the rubble in Bordianka has begun, and the situation there is much more horrible than in Bucha, according to President Vladimir Zelensky. The United Nations General Assembly suspended Russia from the United Nations Human Rights Council on Thursday, citing accusations of gross and systematic breaches and abuses of human rights in Ukraine. Algeria voted on Thursday at the United Nations General Assembly against the decision to suspend Russia's membership in the Human Rights Council. Welcome again. Those were today's top stories, and starting with the latest updates about the Russia-Ukraine file. Ukraine state railway companies say that more than 30 people have been killed and more than 100 were wounded after two Russian rockets struck Kramatorsk railway station in East Ukraine. The Kremlin has denied that Russia was involved in a missile strike on a railway station in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine. The European Commission's Ursula von der Leyen and European Union's Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell soon to meet Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky. Russian forces fully withdrawn from the Ukraine's north, the British Defense Ministry says, and Zelensky warns situation in Bordianka will be more horrible than what the world saw in Bucha. The United Nations General Assembly has voted to suspend Russia from its Human Rights Council, citing concerns over human rights abuses in Ukraine. And Russia has responded by saying the move is illegal and politically motivated. In a speech posted on his Facebook page, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the work to clear the rubble in Bordianka, a town northwest of Kyiv recently recaptured by the Ukrainians from the Russians, has begun, and that the situation there is much more horrible than in Bucha, where massacres of civilians have been committed, according to Ukrainian authorities.
The work began with the analysis of the blockade in Bordianka. It's much more horrible there, even more victims of Russian occupiers. What will happen? What the world learns from the whole truth about the Russian army did in Mariupol, there in almost every street, is what the world saw in Bucha and other cities of the Kiev region after the withdrawal of Russian troops, cruelty, the same terrible crimes.
Foreign ministers participating in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, meeting in Brussels expressed their solidarity with Ukraine in the face of the Russian special operation and affirmed their union regarding sanctions against Russia. Hossein Berkan reports.
Providing arms to Ukraine was the topic mostly discussed during the Atlantic Alliance meeting in Brussels, where the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba asked NATO countries for weapons now, or it will be too late.
Either you help us now, and I'm speaking about days, not weeks, or your help will come too late. And many people will die. Many civilians will lose their homes. Many villages will be destroyed, exactly because this help came too late.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that allies provide a wide range of different weapons systems and emphasized the importance of using these arms for defense.
Allies are providing a wide range of different weapon systems, both Soviet-era systems, but also modern equipment, and I think that this distinction between offensive and defensive is a bit strange, because we speak about providing weapons to a country which is defending itself.
At the end of the NATO meeting, the head of the American diplomacy, Antony Blinken, declared that it is likely that Russian forces will commit more atrocities in the areas they occupy in Ukraine.
With each day, more and more credible reports of rape, killings, torture, are emerging. And for every Bucha, there are many more towns Russia has occupied and more towns it is still occupying.
During the meeting, many non-NATO countries, mainly Scandinavians, stressed that they are studying all options in order to protect their people, including joining NATO due to security concerns.
The United Nations General Assembly suspended Russia from the United Nations Human Rights Council on Thursday, citing accusations of gross and systematic breaches and abuses of human rights in Ukraine, forcing Moscow to withdraw from the council. Miriam Zian in the following.
Russia has been suspended from the United Nations Human Rights Council on Thursday after 93 members voted in favor of the diplomatic rebuke at a meeting of the UN General Assembly. The 193-member assembly passed a resolution supported by the US suspending Russia's position in the UN Human Rights Council for gross and systematic abuses of human rights. A two-thirds majority of the assembly members voted yes, which met the requirements of votes, while 24 were against and 58 abstained. The American ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield welcomed a historic moment at the end of the session.
Right now, the world is looking to us. They are asking if the United Nations is prepared to meet this moment. They're wondering if we are a platform for propaganda and a safe haven for human rights abusers, or if we are prepared to live up to our highest ideals enshrined in the UN Charter. Today, the international community took one collective step in the right direction.
Russia's deputy ambassador urged members to vote against the resolution and rejected the untruthful allegations against Russia. This is the first time a country has been expelled from the United Nations Top Human Rights Council since Muammar Gaddafi's government was overthrown in 2011. Based in Geneva, the UN Human Rights Council consists of 47 members, and under the 2006 resolution that established it, the General Assembly can suspend any country from membership if it commits gross and systematic violations of human rights.
Algeria voted on Thursday on the United Nations General Assembly against the decision to suspend Russia's membership in the Human Rights Council. In a statement, Algeria explained its position against the UN decision. The Algerian ambassador to the UN, Nadir Larbawi, said that Algeria reaffirms its firm attachment to the fundamental rules and principles of the international humanitarian law and the international human rights law.
My delegation believes that international multilateral efforts requires the strengthening of dialogue and cooperation without any exclusion in order to ensure their effectiveness, despite the differences in position. Any attempt to suspend from any UN body an elected member by the entire international community is not conducive to promote the virtues of multilateralism. While reaffirming its support to the direct negotiation between Ukraine and the Russian Federation in order to put an end to the military operations and guaranteeing an urgent response to the humanitarian crisis, Algeria reiterated its call for the intensification of international diplomatic efforts aiming at resolving the current crisis to prevent the growing erosion of the diplomatic norms and reaching, as soon as possible, a political solution that can preserve the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the legitimate and vital interest of the countries.
Russian forces have fully withdrawn out of northern Ukraine, according to a UK Defense Intelligence update Friday morning, as the Russian military operation in Ukraine continues. Russian troops pulled out of the north have gone into Russian allied Belarus, with at least some set to be transferred to fight in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday launched his call by video conference during a special session of the Cypriot parliament, urging Cyprus to revoke passports issued to the Russians as part of an investment program and to prevent private yachts from docking in its marinas. Marwa Belawer reports.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged Cyprus to revoke passports issued to the Russians as part of an investment program and to prevent private yachts from docking in its marinas.
Freeze the Russian use of all their yacht and other vessels in your waters. You can stop the current privileges for Russian citizens, so-called golden passports, for all Russians without exception, that end in dual nationality for them.
While the Cypriot president, Nikos Anastasiadis, speaks on video conference with Vladimir Zelensky, 100 people flock in silence in front of the conference venue to show their support for Ukrainians. Earlier, the European Commission on Wednesday called on Malta to end its controversial system of golden passports granted to wealthy investors in exchange for payments, threatening to take the case to the EU Court of Justice.
I'm grateful for the position with which you and the EU as a whole have responded to the large-scale invasion of Russia. You have taken the firm decision not to allow Russian warships to enter your ports.
In a statement issued on Wednesday, the European executive announced a new stage in the procedure, sending a reasoned opinion to Malta. In the absence of a satisfactory response within 2 months, the Commission could refer the case to the EU Court of Justice. Brussels also recommended at the end of March that EU member states that have granted golden passports to Russian or Belarusian citizens should consider withdrawing them for those subjects to sanctions in connection with the conflict in Ukraine.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will travel to Kiev this week, accompanied by EU Foreign Minister Josep Borrell. The EU leaders are due to have talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky ahead of the Stand Up for Ukraine Donors Conference in Warsaw on April 9th. The two leaders are accompanied by Slovak Prime Minister Edward Heger. Australia donated 20 Bushmaster armored combat vehicles, including 2 equipped as ambulances, to Ukraine in response to a direct request from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to help repel the Russian military operation. The Bushmasters, which bear the Ukrainian flag painted on both sides with slogan "United with Ukraine," have been fitted with radios and global positioning systems, as well as being painted olive green, according to a joint statement from Dutton and Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Australian Defence Minister said Australia was ready to provide more if needed and called developed countries to help rebuilding Ukraine. The U.S. hails a historic moment after the Senate confirmed Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination to the Supreme Court, where she will be the first black woman to serve. The American president watched the broadcast of the Senate vote with the magistrate at the White House and the Democrat, for whom this appointment is an undeniable political success, has already invited her to speak at his sides Friday. Speaker of the United States House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi was traveling to Taiwan after media reports raised the possibility of such a visit.
This visit will seriously violate the One China principle and the provisions of the 3 joint communiques. It will seriously undermine China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and seriously impact the political foundation of China-US relations. It will also send a very bad signal to the independence forces in Taiwan. China strongly opposes it and has made solemn demarches to the United States.
U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has tested positive for COVID-19 a day after she appeared without a mask at the White House with President Joe Biden. Her spokesman, Drew Hamill, said that Pelosi had received a positive test result for COVID-19 and that she's currently without symptoms. He indicated in a tweet that Pelosi had taken a test earlier in the week and its result was negative. In Peru, a state of emergency was announced on highways as tensions rise between demonstrators and police. The clashes has caused 1 person to be killed and 16 others to be injured. The insights in this report by Nabil Khazini.
For the second week, protests throughout Peru continue against the spike in fuel and fertilizer prices. The Peruvian government has announced a 1-month state of emergency in highways as a step to control the ongoing clashes between protesters and police.
I congratulate the leaders and the demonstrators who go out to the streets and the squares, as they have always done and always accompanied their struggles, defending rights to water, defending life, education, but in the best way, the right way, not throwing stones, not knocking down bricks, not taking up knives, not by picking up weapons.
Thousands demonstrated in and around Peru's capital of Lima, continuing the days-long cycle of unease, sometimes ending in violent protests, which left one farm worker dead and 15 people injured. The violence came after Pedro Castillo called off a curfew in Lima aimed at curbing nationwide protests.
The country needs a tax reform, it needs an agrarian revolution, it needs to improve education and health. It needs more public and private investment to generate work, workers' rights, but there is a Congress that isn't allowing Pedro Castillo to govern. That is why we came out to the streets to defend democracy, governance and the popular vote.
The Peruvian head of state has tried to extinguish the social anger that was mounting last week by removing a fuel tax and increasing the minimum wage by 10%.
We are asking President Pedro Castillo moderation and for him to comply with what he promised. He has those who are supporting him. He should not think he's alone.
Only recently, an impeachment procedure failed against the Peruvian president, and the current protests raise questions about the political and social situation in the South American country.
Torrential rains and flooding in Colombia have killed at least 12 people, with another 2 reported missing. According to local authorities, the incident happened at a mining camp in a mountainous northwest Colombia, where a group were surprised by the floods as they were eating dinner. The flooding destroyed one level of the mining camp, and rescue efforts were delayed due to the bad weather. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan appears closer than ever to exit after the Supreme Court on Thursday overturned the dissolution of the National Assembly and ordered a no-confidence motion against him to be put to a vote. The surprise move is a huge blow for the former cricket star who was elected in 2018. His last-minute strategy to avoid being overthrown by the opposition ultimately didn't work. A gas explosion in the eastern Algerian city of Burj killed 9 people and 16 were injured. The explosion happened when a gas leak occurred in a 3-floor building, causing it to completely collapse. Nearby houses were also affected by the gas explosion. Local authorities in the area say rescue workers are still searching for other possible victims. President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, receives Libyan Foreign Minister Najlan Mangoush in the presidential palace. The visit of the neighboring country's foreign minister was in the presence of the Algerian Foreign Minister Untitled and the President's Office Director Abdelaziz Khalaf. Morocco's king hosted the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez in Rabat after a year-long of diplomatic crisis between the two countries. The visit comes weeks after the Spanish Prime Minister changed his position over neutrality concerning Western Sahara. This decision has sparked a domestic backlash, with Spain's parliament on Thursday condemning the move in a motion put forward by his coalition ally, Podemos. An explosion of still undetermined origin Thursday evening, killing 8 people and injured 3 in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The bar of a military camp in Goma was reported targeted, according to a provisional report communicated by the government spokesperson. Survivors expressed fear after the explosion. Matter now, the German Chancellor has announced that local imports for his country would be quickly reduced and that the technical and legal conditions for the import of gas will be organized to come in sufficient quantities from other countries other than Russia.
It was decided that coal imports would be rapidly reduced by ending delivery contracts during a transition period. The contracts will be replaced by new ones with countries other than Russia. This, of course, also applies to gas, for which, however, we have to create a considerable number of infrastructural conditions in order for us to import gas in sufficient quantities from other countries.
Jean-Luc Mélenchon addressed the voters of Marine Le Pen who, in his eyes, deceived them by being far from their elementary concerns. Tuesday from Lille during his multiple meeting at Holograms a few days before the first round. The far-right candidate is several points ahead of Le Pen, third also dynamic in the polls for qualification in the second round.
Mais voyez-vous, je vais en profiter pour parler à une variété de nos...
I'm going to take the opportunity to talk to a variety of our fellow citizens. Listen, you angry people who are not fascist. In the end, where does it take you? This story of trying to bring this woman to power, where do you find yourselves in anything she says or does? Isn't everything she does entirely tinged with some kind of class contempt?
Ce qu'elle dit ou ce qu'elle fait.
Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry announced on Thursday the return of its ambassador to Lebanon, and a positive sign of thaw in their tense ties. The move came after Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati pledged to take the necessary and required measures to enhance cooperation with the kingdom and other members of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Pink Floyd, the British rock band, has performed after nearly 30 years and released a new song to support the people of Ukraine who have been displaced by Russia's attack on their nation. The song's music video, which features guitarist and vocalist David Glimmer and drummer Nick Mason, as well as vocals from Andriy Plenivok of Boombox, one of Ukraine's largest bands, was released on the band's official YouTube channel. And before we wrap it up, here's a reminder of today's headlines.
Along a bank scarred by deforestation, Joseph Modinjimangi points to a solitary mangrove tree, a species of tree once abundant in the estuary when the mighty Sabaki River meets the Indian Ocean. For the inhabitants of this area of the eastern coast of Kenya, the miraculous tree is a reminder of the work to be carried out to regain the natural balance broken by decades of overexploitation.
So the point at which we've got to now, globally, in Africa, in Kenya, or just looking at the Kenyan coast, is the population density is very high already, and the amount of resources that have already been extracted by fishing, by clearing vegetation, by cutting wood for charcoal or for construction and things like that, is we are already at an ecosystem or environmental deficit right now.
For generations, local communities have drawn on the natural resources offered by the Sabaki: wood, firewood, fresh water, seafood, fertile agriculture land, plants for traditional medicine, and much more. Maintaining this coastal wetland has many advantages in the face of climate change: carbon storage, filtering of water pollution, natural protection against extreme weather events, and rising sea levels. But years of uncontrolled exploitation have inflicted terrible damage on the mangroves, mudfloods, freshwater pools, and sand dunes that line the mouth of Kenya's second longest river.
The world is changing a lot, but for the mangroves, the ability to bounce back and come back and colonize the areas they used to be in the past is quite encouraging.
Mangrove wood, used sustainably for centuries to build traditional Swahili homes, has been heavily used to support rapidly growing cities, such as the nearby resort town of Malindi. To fish, the inhabitants have notably used mosquito nets, which have trapped even the smallest of marine species.
And that was the Samariyadi reporting, and now we can have a reminder of the headlines. Work to clear the rubble in Bordianka has begun, and the situation there is much more horrible than Bucha, according to President Volodymyr Zelensky. The United Nations General Assembly suspended Russia from the United Nations Human Rights Council on Thursday, citing accusations of gross and systematic breaches and abuses of human rights in Ukraine. And finally, as you followed in our news bulletin, Algeria voted on Thursday at the United Nations General Assembly against the decision to suspend Russia's membership in the Human Rights Council. And with this, our program comes to a close. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.